I was actually in this room not too long ago, and I was sitting here thinking, what is so familiar about all of this? And it occurred to me, the last time I was in this room, I was asking Dr. Wildeman the same question. What about sexism, discrimination? What about these kinds of things? And like, how is it playing into, because what I'm hearing from this panel is that classism is a huge issue, and that capitalism needs to be adjusted in the whole system, which I'm not arguing. But what I'm saying, I guess my concern is, and eventually I'm going to ask the question, is that other movements have done similar things. You can look at first, second, third wave feminism. They've left certain particular groups out of these movements, and I see the occupation making the exact same mistakes. And I'm also hearing, well, people are, arguing for their own things, and it's a collective, and everyone's getting together. But it's the same voices that are being heard over and over and over again. And as we're sitting here, again, it's, an all-male panel. 4 or 5 have a university degree or are working towards it. And I know there were efforts to include a female speaker from the occupation. But, the fact is it isn't. And I'm sure, like we hear this rhetoric a lot, like, we've tried to do this, we've tried to do that. But the fact is, when will we see the change? So I guess my question is, other than the actual encampments, say Occupy Windsor, how is this movement any different from the past leftist movements?
Basically, I think, like I said, I wouldn't call this a really well organized. It's not like like other movements in that it's really well organized. There's one group, like iBusters didn't come up with the idea and send everybody and said, this is the plan, that's what we're going to do in school. Most people involved probably don't even know iBusters started. So it's because it's that type of, it's like a really open, such an open movement. Just people are just getting together. There's no real organization yet. It's still developing. So at this point, I wouldn't say like, okay, it's this or that. You can't I don't think you can definitively, you can just define it right now the way it is. Right now, I think it's just a cultural, like I said, it's a cultural shift. People are moving towards coming out and getting organized outside the status quo, and it's going to develop. And if there's a significant amount of people who want to talk about feminist issues or different issues other than what's supposedly being heard right now, then that I don't see any problem with that. Like, there's no barrier to that happening at all. So we've had a teach-in right now. I remember we had a teach-in on rape culture and feminism already at the Occupy Windsor, and we had, I'm sure other occupations have the same thing. But like right now, I think it's just too early to define this is the way it is. So it's going to be. It's just like it's developing. It's so new and it's so spontaneous that you can't really definitively can't define it at all. So.
Okay, I wasn't advocating for feminism. Just FYI, I was just even the word the occupation is like, what about indigenous peoples and their experiences? Like this is already the land is already occupied. So I'm not advocating for feminism. I'm just saying that these voices are not being heard.
There is Occupy the Hood, started in New York, and it started in efforts to get people of color, people in urbanized areas, or people who maybe aren't politically motivated to come up and speak and come up to Occupy. So that has started, that has expanded to Detroit. And it's been very active, and they've been coming to a lot of the direct actions in solidarity. Also, to speak to that too, another minority group, there was that, I'm not sure if I mentioned it when I was up, but there was a group of pastors, and they're making anti-gay lesbian statements. And the Occupy group decided, you know what, if we're in this together, we have to show our support, and they went and did a counter demonstration. Because they had basically the group of pastors organized a sort of rally about the issues they were talking about, which were apparently not, didn't see gays in good light because in the eyes of certain, whatever, Christian God, they're deemed as sinners or whatever. So Occupy went down and said, hey, you know what? Shit's fucked up, and we're all here together recognizing shit is fucked up. Black, white, gay, or whatever, you know what I mean? So there has been efforts like that in Detroit. I'm not sure if we've seen them to the same extent as Windsor. There has been I know there's been that teaching on feminism, but I think that's definitely important though, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Just like the concerns that you're outlining. I mean, this has been discussed in the camp. We have noticed this, and like I said, like we really tried to make that effort to include a female speaker. Unfortunately,
Is that why you guys have a bitch box in your camera work? Yeah, if you're trying to be inclusive, then why name your complaint box the bitch box?
Hey.
What's the definition? It means female dog. Okay, so.
All right, hold on. Let Daryl finish his response.
We started reaching out to Walpole Island. We're hoping to make connections with the Aboriginal community and sort of discuss this issue because it's been noted, like, you know, this is occupied land and we're occupying the occupied land, and how does that work? We're just trying to form that dialogue with them. I know in other occupations, this relationship has been formed with Aboriginal communities and they're trying to work this issue out. I think in Toronto specifically, we are trying to figure out how to include those who are disabled right now. There's been an issue at General Assemblies where some people are very disruptive, and we're trying to figure out how do we include them in the discussion without disrupting the entire General Assembly. And these are just sort of like works in progress. As for the bitch box, I'm not sure. You'd have to talk to the person who made it. I don't know anything about that.
This is for Newman right there. Actually, I'm not quite loud enough to do that. You mentioned in the New York Times that there was Nobel Peace winner Krugman or whatever went out and made a statement for the Occupy movements. I am awful with names, but I believe he actually gave a TED talk on social inequality in general, and did very clearly outline, if this was him, that whenever a society has inequality, the standard of living goes down exponentially sometimes, but for both sides of the class spectrum. And I do wonder that if there is a concerted effort to more or less demonize social services within the public mindset and in a forum to more or less starve the beast to serve their own ends. Do you agree with this?
Agree with what?
That there is a concerted effort to starve the beast, or rather to defund social services in order to maintain, or in order to greater make inequality.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's been the dominant tendency for the last 30 years or so, which is to privatize public services, to undermine the capacity of societies to care for themselves by non-market means, to intensify the dependence that I was talking about. Yeah.
And so I assume you agree that it's also going more and more in the line of an oligarchy.
Well, I mean, an oligarchy, you could call it whatever you want. I don't think the names matter so much. But, I mean, in the sense that it's the rule of the few, yeah.
It is the rule.
Definitely, yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Basically, the question I have is, everybody in this room is the 99%. Okay? Now, I look at it this way. When you are employed somewhere, the only effect that you can take against an employer ultimately is to lay your tools down. It's the only way you can get any demand. Unfortunately, it's become that way with our politicians. They make the laws. They hold out their hands. They get them filled by the corporations. So I'm looking at the point of view, we have to get outside of that. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we get outside their society and run our own? That's the question I'd like to see this panel answer. Now, are we going to lay our tools down? That's ultimately what we're going to have to do. And everybody in this room is going to have to come to that decision. Because you are the 99%. And that 1% is taking advantage of it. You are part of it every time you pick up a coffee at 7-Eleven, rather than going to the corner guy that used to be on the corner. He's no longer there because 7-Eleven's run him out of business. Or Tim Hortons. Don't think because it's a Canadian corporation they're going to treat you any better. So I want everybody in this room to take home with them that fact. So answer the question.
if I knew the answer to that
Yeah,
question.
exactly.
Right.
I'm ready to go all the way with this and say, with the movement, and say we have to actually change the electoral process. I'd like to see what's going on at the, we have to change democracy. I like to see what has been going on at Occupies, where people, that consensus making process, I like to see that mobilized in the political system. Kind of like what they had in Athens, I guess. Was it Athens? I like to see that, although Athens, way back then, you couldn't go if you were a slave or a woman. Not that part about it sucked. But I'd like to see us come in, lay people could come in and bring up issues and actually be mobilized as part of the political process. But yes, you still need people there who are very much entrenched in the political language. You still need those people there. You can't just say, let's abolish, this is personal opinion, of course. You can't just say, we'll abolish all those people. You still need people who are there who understand legal jargon, who understand political jargon. Let's come to terms. Not everyone understands that jargon. Not everyone's educated in that jargon or that manner of political approach. But I definitely would like to see more consensus making with lay people instated into the democratic procedure. And perhaps this is a movement, like when the IWW started 105, 106 years ago, people worked, it was, there was no, it seems like there's more middle ground here, there's more middle class. There was less of a distinction. You owned the thing or you worked for the thing, or were supported by someone who worked for the machine. And you worked 12 hours a day or whatever it was in mostly manufacturing at that time or whatever industry, there was less service industry. You work 12 hours a day, you work 7 days a week. IWW and labor groups started saying, you know what, that sucks. People are dying, people are losing their hands, they're tired when they're working, whatnot. And now this change they made, maybe they didn't see changes right away, but as time evolved, because of movements like that, things started, like the American Civil Liberties Union, started by an ex-IWW member. And I'm hoping, and again, this is personal, I'm hoping that Occupy, the seeds that we're planting now, get expanded and grow into something fruitful for democracy for the world in the future. And it's that consensus-making tool.
The only thing I would say is that I think it is desirable, of course, to change the electoral system, but it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Like, how do you get to change the electoral system if the economic structure remains the same? You never. And ultimately, I think what we need to be talking about or thinking about is ways and means in which we can move the whole notion of participative democracy forward as an idea. We move it forward really by embracing it in our daily lives and in our organizations and in our communities. And ultimately, I mean, that's part of what the labor movement needs to do. It needs to change in that very fundamental way. So that it is able to mobilize its members in a way effective enough to really challenge capital. And it'll only happen in that foundation, that basis. But the electoral system itself, to change it, is going to be meaningless if you don't actually change the economic structure. And you can only get that to that point if you actually have the workers organized in a way that they realize that the system is arranged against them. Their interests are not associated with that system. Their interests are associated with getting rid of that system.
Yeah, what I would say is basically there needs to be, number one thing is the cultural aspect. We need to make this the norm for all societies, or for everybody, the majority of the public in our society, to be sort of accepting of the idea that we shouldn't tolerate corruption. We shouldn't tolerate anything less than actual democracy. The way our democracy is supposed to work is sort of backwards. You elect somebody, and after they're elected, they don't have to care about what you think. They can do whatever they want. And so they basically come to us, and they tell us about you because I'm a nice person and whatever. And then we vote for them, and then they're pretty much a dictator for 4 years until the next election. And then the way it's supposed to work is they're not supposed to be making decisions on behalf of us. We're supposed to be telling them, you do this, and then they do it. But of course, there's no infrastructure for that to happen. The culture is not fit for that to happen at all. So I think it wouldn't be hard at all, I think, to make simple demands like what Advisors came up with, like they demand that Obama make a presidential commission to get money out